You won't believe how a quiet, ordinary-looking man was forced out of his first-class seat just because of how he looked. But what happened next shocked everyone on that flight. Stick around till the end, because this story takes a turn nobody expected. His name was Raymond Carter. He wore a plain jacket, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just wanted to get home. Raymond walked through the airport calmly, holding only a small backpack. He didn't have a luxury watch, no designer luggage, no personal assistant dragging behind him. He blended in. Maybe that was the problem. At the boarding gate, he handed over his ticket. The woman behind the desk scanned it, paused for a moment, and looked him up and down. Then she smiled awkwardly and waved him through. Row 1A. That's what his ticket said. First class, right in the front. He reached his seat, nodded politely to the person sitting nearby, and settled in. He didn't recline his seat all the way. He just sat there quietly, waiting for the plane to take off. 10 minutes later, a flight attendant approached him. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass again?" Raymond handed it over without hesitation. She looked at the pass, then back at him. Then she called someone else. Another crew member came over, glanced at the ticket, then leaned closer to whisper something in her ear. They both looked uncomfortable. "Sir," she said again, this time firmer, "I'm going to have to ask you to step out for a moment." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong?" "There seems to be a mistake. This seat is reserved for a first-class passenger." "I am a first-class passenger," he said calmly. She looked at him, hesitated, then motioned to a man in a suit standing nearby. He stepped forward. "Sir," the man said, "we'll need to verify your booking. Please come with us." People were watching now. Some passengers leaned over their seats. Others turned around. Whispers started, a few snickers. Raymond sighed and got up. He walked with the man to the front of the plane. The door was still open. They stepped onto the boarding bridge. The man pulled out a tablet and typed something. "I'm sorry," he said, "but we just need to confirm. You understand?" Raymond didn't argue. He just waited. Then came a voice behind them. "What's going on here?" A woman in business attire walked up. She looked important. She glanced between Raymond and the man with the tablet. "This passenger is in 1A, the man explained. But his appearance raised some concerns. Her eyes narrowed. "Concerns? What kind of concerns?" The man didn't answer. She took the tablet from him, looked at the screen, then looked back at Raymond. "This is Mr. Carter?" she asked. Raymond nodded. She froze. Her expression changed immediately. Her posture stiffened. "I see," she said. The man beside her looked confused. "Is there a problem?" She leaned closer to him and whispered something quickly. His face went pale. He looked at Raymond, then back at the screen, then at Raymond again. They both looked nervous now. "Mr. Carter," the woman said quickly, "please accept our deepest apologies. There was a misunderstanding." Raymond didn't say anything. He just waited. "We didn't realize who you were," she said, her voice soft now. "Is my seat still available?" he asked calmly. "Of course, please. Right this way." They escorted him back to first class, this time treating him with more care than any passenger on board. People noticed the difference. Whispers started again. A few passengers were trying to figure out what just happened. Some looked embarrassed. Others just stared. Raymond sat down, fastened his seatbelt, and looked out the window. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because halfway through the flight, The man who had laughed when Raymond was asked to leave first class earlier walked up from economy. He stood awkwardly near Raymond's seat and said, "Hey man, I just wanted to say, no hard feelings, right? They were just doing their job, you know?" Raymond looked up at him, his face calm. "No hard feelings," he said. The man smiled, relieved, and walked away. An hour later, the pilot made an announcement. "We'd like to thank a very special guest flying with us today, Mr. Raymond Carter, founder and majority owner of Northglide Airways. It's an honor to have you on board." There was silence. Then gasps. Heads turned. People started whispering again. The man in economy who had laughed earlier looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. The woman next to him looked stunned. The flight attendants came to Raymond again, offering him more drinks, more snacks, anything he needed. He didn't ask for anything. He just smiled and said, "I'm fine, thank you." But word was spreading fast. People started pulling out their phones. Some were looking up his name. Others just stared at him in disbelief. The woman who had first asked to see his ticket came back. She looked pale. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, I want to apologize for earlier. I didn't mean—" Raymond stopped her with a kind smile. "It's all right," he said. "But maybe next time don't judge someone by how they look." She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Of course." But it wasn't just her, because when the plane landed, there were reporters waiting at the gate. Raymond Carter stepped off the plane without saying a word to the reporters gathered at the arrival gate. Flashing cameras, shouted questions, curious travelers. He ignored them all. He didn't walk fast or slow, just steady, like always. One of the reporters called out, "Mr. Carter, is it true you were removed from first class on your own airline?" Raymond didn't even glance back. He walked through the terminal with the same calm face he had when they took his seat away. He was used to it. Not the cameras, those didn't come often, but the judgment. People seeing what he wore and assuming they knew who he was, assuming he didn't belong, but they were wrong. He had built everything they were standing in. The seats, the planes, the logos on the walls. That airline, Northglide Airways, was his. The problem was, nobody ever really looked at him long enough to realize it. The moment the plane landed, the flight crew had scrambled to alert the airline's local manager. Within minutes, Raymond's identity was confirmed, and the news traveled fast. Someone had leaked the story to the media before he even reached the jet bridge. By the time Raymond made it to the black sedan waiting outside the terminal, his phone had already buzzed 6 times. Texts, emails, 2 missed calls. He didn't check them. He didn't need to. He opened the car door, sat down, and nodded to the driver. "Just home," he said. The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. Inside the car, Raymond finally checked his phone. There were messages from several departments: public relations, HR, operations. One message stood out. It was from Olivia Lynn, Northglide's chief of operations. "Raymond, I heard what happened. We're holding an emergency meeting with the internal team. Please advise if you'd like to join." He didn't reply. Not yet. When Raymond reached his home, a modest 2-story place tucked behind trees in a quiet part of town, he placed his phone on the kitchen counter and made a cup of tea. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. He answered. "Raymond," Olivia's voice came through, steady but tense. "We've already started. PR is preparing a statement. Legal is reviewing internal policy. And frankly, people are panicking." Raymond stirred his tea slowly. "Why?" "You're the owner. They pulled the owner off the plane." "I know. They embarrassed you in public." It's already on the internet. There's a video. I know, he repeated. Olivia hesitated. So, what do you want us to do? Raymond thought for a second. Nothing. Not yet. Nothing? I want to see who comes forward on their own. There was silence. All right, she finally said. We'll hold off. For now. By the next morning, the story had already gone viral. The headline read, "Man removed from first class for looking poor. Turns out he owns the airline." The video taken by a passenger in business class had been posted on social media. In it, you could clearly see Raymond being asked to leave his seat, the awkward exchange, and then, hours later, the stunned faces when the pilot made the announcement. There were thousands of comments. They kicked the owner out? Wow. Respect to this guy for staying calm. This just shows how messed up airline culture is. Dude looks like a regular guy, but he's a millionaire. Mad respect. Raymond scrolled for a moment, then locked his phone. He didn't care about the attention. He just wanted to know what came next. At Northglide's headquarters, chaos was unfolding. Departments were reviewing policy manuals. Some executives were whispering in hallways. The internal messaging system was flooded with apologies, explanations, and excuses. The CEO, David McConnell, sat in his office, holding a printed report of the incident. His assistant stood nearby. "He didn't say anything?" David asked. "Not a word," the assistant replied. "Just walked off the plane and went home." David leaned back in his chair. That's worse. He had known Raymond for years. They'd built the company together. But Raymond never asked for attention. He stayed behind the scenes, handled logistics, made things work quietly. David was the one who did interviews, met with investors, smiled for photos. But he knew better than anyone. Raymond owned more of the company than anyone else. He didn't talk a lot, but when he did, people listened. David tapped his fingers on the desk. "Call an executive meeting, today." Meanwhile, one person from the flight couldn't shake the memory. Her name was Chelsea Graves. She had been sitting in first class, a few rows behind Raymond. She remembered how he had been treated. She remembered the awkward silence when he returned to his seat. And she remembered the pilot's announcement. She worked in marketing at a luxury travel firm, and she knew how fast stories like this could spread, and how fast reputations could sink. She opened her laptop and started typing an email. To Raymond Carter. Subject: What happened on Flight 227? Mr. Carter, I was on the same flight as you yesterday. I saw what happened. I also saw how you handled it, with quiet strength. You don't know me, but I work in brand strategy. And if you ever need someone to help rebuild the public image of Northglide, I'd be honored. Either way, I just wanted to say, thank you for how you carried yourself. It left an impression. She clicked send. She didn't expect a reply, but Raymond read it that night. And for the first time all day, he smiled. The next morning, he showed up at the Northglide headquarters unannounced. No suit. Just the same plain jacket and jeans. He walked past the reception desk and into the elevator. By the time he stepped out on the top floor, half the executive team had already been notified. David met him at the door. "Raymond," he said quickly, "we've been reviewing everything. Training procedures, dress code bias, customer service behavior. We're ready to take action." Raymond looked around the room. Everyone was there. Legal, human resources, public relations, operations, even the head of in-flight experience. He nodded once. "I just have one question," he said. Everyone leaned in. "How many of you would have treated me differently if I was wearing a $5,000 suit?" The room went silent. Nobody answered. He looked directly at the head of customer experience. I was pulled out of my seat, publicly humiliated, and no one on that flight stood up. Not one person in uniform said, "This isn't right." The woman looked down. "I'm not angry," Raymond said, "but I am paying attention." Then he paused and let that settle. After a moment, he continued, "We're going to change things, not just with apologies, but real change." He looked at Olivia. "I want a review of training protocols, bias awareness, passenger interaction guidelines, and I want to personally sign off on every change." She nodded. Then he turned back to the group. "And from this point on, I want every employee, from check-in to cabin crew, to understand something." He paused. "Respect isn't about what someone wears. It's about how you treat them, even when you don't know who they are." Raymond's words echoed long after he left the meeting room. No one dared to speak right away. Some executives looked down at their notes. Others stared at the door he had just walked out of, unsure of what to do next. David finally stood up. "You all heard him. This isn't just about policy anymore. This is personal. For him, for the company, and for everyone watching from the outside." He turned to Olivia. "Set up a task force, every department. I want proposals on my desk by end of week." She nodded. "We'll get started immediately." As the meeting ended and people filed out, the quiet tone of the room remained. No one cracked jokes. No one rolled their eyes. The usual corporate chatter was gone. The mood had changed, and everyone felt it. Meanwhile, Raymond sat in his small home office that night, sipping tea and reviewing documents from past years. Incident reports, passenger feedback, notes from internal audits. He had always believed in a people-first approach, but now he realized something. Somewhere along the way, that vision had gotten lost. He saw numbers, metrics, quarterly goals, but very few notes about real human interaction. He picked up his phone and called Olivia. "We need someone who understands people," he said. "Someone who doesn't just work in HR or PR, but someone who gets the value of personal experience." "I might know someone," Olivia replied. "Good. Let's meet them." 2 days later, Chelsea Graves arrived at North Glide headquarters. She was surprised when she got the email asking to meet. Even more surprised when she walked into a conference room and saw Raymond already there, seated casually at the table. He smiled. "Thanks for writing me." "I didn't expect you to respond," she said honestly. "Well, most people wouldn't have written at all. That said something." Chelsea sat across from him. "I meant what I said. What happened on that plane, it shouldn't have happened. But the way you handled it, people noticed." Raymond nodded. "That's the problem, though. They only noticed because I own the airline. If I didn't, no one would have cared." Chelsea looked down for a second. "You're right. That's the truth." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to change how we treat people, not with some fancy PR campaign. I want to create real change. I want to bring humanity back into air travel. Do you want to help me?" Chelsea didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Good," Raymond said. "Let's start today." Word of Raymond's return to the office spread fast. Employees across departments heard the news. The owner wasn't just stepping back into the spotlight. He was taking charge of how the company treated people, both customers and staff. He didn't fire anyone. He didn't make dramatic speeches. But his presence alone made people rethink how they operated. Raymond spent his days walking through departments, baggage services, call centers, training rooms. He asked questions, took notes, and listened, really listened. He spoke to agents who said they were under pressure to stick to rigid rules, even if those rules didn't make sense. He met flight attendants who admitted they judged passengers based on appearance because they'd been trained to treat premium guests a certain way. It was subtle, but it was everywhere. He wrote everything down. At the same time, Chelsea was building something of her own. She had set up a private feedback channel, anonymous, direct, and completely open, for Northglide employees to share stories. Not numbers, not stats, just stories. Stories of passengers treated poorly for wearing old clothes. Employees overlooked for promotions because they didn't dress like executives. People doing their best with no support, no training, no voice. Raymond read every single one. One message stood out. It was from a young gate agent who had been working at Northglide for less than a year. "I always wanted to work for an airline, but now I feel like I'm stuck between policies and people. I want to treat passengers kindly, but I'm scared of breaking the rules." That one hit hard. Raymond had created this company with the goal of making flying feel human again. He had poured years into it, but somewhere along the way, policies had started replacing people. He looked at Chelsea and said, "It's time to clean house. Not fire people, just reset what this company stands for." The next day, Raymond called for an all-staff meeting. Thousands of Northglide employees tuned in, some in person, most online. It was the first time many of them had ever heard directly from the company's founder. He stood at the front of a simple stage. No suit, just the same old jacket and jeans. "Some of you know who I am," he began. "Some of you might have just found out. But I'm not here today to talk about titles or ownership." He paused. "I'm here because I was treated like I didn't belong on a flight I helped create. And I wasn't treated that way because someone knew who I was. I was treated that way because they didn't." He looked around the room. "That tells me we've lost something important. We've forgotten that respect doesn't depend on a price tag, or a seat number, or what someone wears." A quiet wave of nods moved through the room. "So here's what's going to happen. We're rewriting the handbook. We're retraining every employee, from senior staff to first-day hires, not to memorize scripts, but to remember one thing." Another pause. "People matter. No matter what they look like, no matter how they dress, no matter where they sit," he continued. "There will be no punishment for kindness. There will be no bonus for arrogance. And from today forward, no one at Northglide will be punished for doing the right thing, even if it means bending a rule that doesn't make sense." The room stayed quiet, but not empty. The silence came from focus, not boredom. Raymond ended with a final sentence. "This company belongs to everyone who chooses to fly with us. Let's start treating them like it." After the meeting, things started to change. Slowly at first, then faster. Flight attendants began speaking up when they saw mistreatment. Gate agents started offering small kindnesses, free upgrades for military veterans, small notes for kids traveling alone. Not because it was required, but because they wanted to. Managers started rewarding compassion, not just punctuality. And one surprising thing happened. Customer satisfaction began to rise, quietly but clearly, without any flashy campaigns, just word of mouth. People were talking about Northglide again, but this time, it wasn't about a viral video. It was about feeling respected. A month after the incident, Raymond got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note. "I was the man who told you to give up your seat. I didn't know who you were, I judged you. I'm sorry." Raymond folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need a name. That letter was enough. It meant the message had gotten through. Chelsea walked into Raymond's office that afternoon. "We've got the new training modules ready," she said. "Bias awareness, passenger care, the works." Raymond looked up from his notes. "Good. Let's get them live." Chelsea smiled. "You think it'll work?" Raymond nodded slowly. "It already is. 2 weeks passed." The changes were in motion, and people were starting to notice. Not just within Northglide, but outside too. Travel bloggers, business writers, and even loyal passengers were posting about their experiences. Stories of small but meaningful changes began to spread. A flight attendant who offered to sit with an anxious traveler. A ground staff member who walked an elderly passenger all the way to the gate without being asked. A pilot who personally apologized for a long delay instead of hiding behind announcements. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. And it was working. Raymond kept a close eye on it all, but he didn't talk much. He let the results speak for themselves. But Chelsea, always the one to ask the tougher questions, walked into his office with something on her mind. She dropped a report in front of him. "There's one issue we haven't fixed yet." Raymond looked at the paper. It was a survey. Passenger perceptions. Specifically about premium seating. "People still think first class is for a certain type of person," she said. "And worse, some of our staff still treat it that way." Raymond leaned back. "Even after the retraining?" She nodded. "They're following the new rules. But it's surface level for some of them. Deep down, old habits are still there. And I think I know why." He looked at her, waiting. "Because we never changed the image, the look, the culture around it. First class still looks like a gated castle. The uniforms are sharper, the tone is colder, the lines are clearer." Raymond understood. "So what do we do?" Chelsea answered without hesitation. "We tear down the walls." The following week, Raymond launched the company's most unconventional test yet. It started on one single route, a long-haul international flight from Seattle to Tokyo. A route known for its high volume of business travelers and executives. But this time, the crew was briefed differently. There would be no separate pre-boarding for premium passengers, no velvet ropes, no two-toned uniforms. Everyone boarded from the same line. Everyone was greeted with the same smile. And while first class still had all the comforts and space it always did, the attitude inside was different. There was warmth, not stiffness, conversation, not silence. It was subtle, but passengers noticed. A woman in economy class with a small child was offered help. Not just from a flight attendant, but from a first-class passenger who had been treated with kindness earlier and wanted to pay it forward. A man who had booked a premium seat in full business attire relaxed into conversation with the person beside him, an artist wearing worn sneakers and a hoodie. They both laughed at the same movie halfway through the flight. When the flight landed, several passengers personally thanked the crew, not for luxury, but for respect. Raymond sat in the very last row on that flight. No one knew he was there, and that's exactly how he wanted it. The results from that one flight came in a few days later. Passenger satisfaction, higher than ever. Complaints, 0. And crew morale, off the charts. Chelsea walked into Raymond's office holding the report. "It's working," she said. Raymond looked at the final comment on the page, written by one of the first-class passengers. "This didn't feel like flying first class. It felt like flying human." Raymond smiled. That's the goal. But not everyone was thrilled. Some long-time business clients had taken notice. A few executives from corporate partnerships raised concerns. They liked the exclusivity. They liked feeling different, better. One even sent a direct email to Raymond. People don't pay for first class just for legroom. They pay for the barrier. Don't forget that. Raymond stared at that sentence for a while. Then he replied, "We're building an airline, not a wall." He never heard back. While the cultural shift was happening in the air, another change was brewing on the ground. Olivia had been working quietly on a new project. It was something Raymond had mentioned in passing, but now she was bringing it to life. It was a new hiring and training center, focused not just on skills, but on values. The interviews were different. Candidates weren't judged just on how well they spoke or how sharp their resumes looked. They were judged on how they treated others. Role plays were used to test empathy, not performance. One applicant helped another fix their broken pen in the waiting room. Another gave up their seat for an elderly man who came in late. Those actions mattered just as much as their interview responses. Raymond visited the center during its first week. He watched quietly from the corner as applicants were welcomed in. No suits, no stiff handshakes, just real people. And that's exactly what he wanted to see. But as always, not everything went smoothly. 2 months after the new protocols began, a situation popped up at a regional airport. A woman flying standby had been told by a gate agent, who hadn't yet gone through the new training, that there was no room in first class. Her clothes were dusty from travel. Her shoes looked worn. She quietly accepted the news and sat down. But a senior staff member watching the exchange checked the manifest. There were 2 seats open. He walked over, asked the woman for her name, and confirmed her ticket. Then he personally walked her to the gate and upgraded her without another word. The woman cried. She wasn't anyone famous. She wasn't rich. But she had been traveling for 3 days to see her daughter graduate from medical school, and she had used every point she had saved up for that seat. When Raymond heard the story, he didn't get angry. He asked for the name of the staff member who had stepped in, and promoted him to training lead for new hires. "We need more like him," he said. Back in the office, Chelsea was preparing a new campaign. Not an advertisement, not a commercial, but a message from the airline. Simple, honest, clear. Raymond reviewed the draft and nodded. At the top of the page was the headline, "No one should have to look rich to be treated with respect." He approved it immediately. One morning, Raymond arrived at the airport unannounced. No security team, no cameras. Just him, the way he used to travel. He checked in at the kiosk like anyone else, walked through the terminal, sat at the gate. And for the first time in a long time, no one gave him a second look. Not because he was ignored, but because everyone around him was being treated the same way. And that was the moment he knew. It wasn't just about policy or headlines or ownership. It was about dignity. And Northglide was finally becoming what he always wanted it to be. The weeks kept rolling, and something unexpected started to happen. The story of Northglide's transformation was reaching people who had never flown the airline. Videos were being shared. Comments flooded in from travelers who felt seen for the first time. Word was spreading fast, and not just online. Other airlines were quietly watching too. Raymond didn't talk about it much. He was never in it for praise. But something told him it wasn't over yet. There was one piece left unfinished. He hadn't been back to the exact flight where this entire story began, the one where he had been kicked out of first class. He didn't need revenge. That wasn't what this was about. But he needed closure. So he booked the same route, the same airline number, same departure time. Only this time, he booked the seat openly under his real name, not hidden, not undercover, just himself. When he arrived at the airport, everything looked different. Not the building, not the signs, but the feeling. Staff greeted him the same way they greeted everyone. Warmly, naturally, without scanning for brands or judging clothes. He noticed the woman working at the check-in desk. Her smile was easy, not forced. She didn't flinch when she saw his name. "Mr. Raymond Bennett," she said, confirming his details. "Welcome. Thank you for flying with us again." Again, she knew, but she didn't mention anything else. No extra treatment, no spectacle, just kindness. At the boarding gate, there was no separation, no exclusive zone. Everyone stood in the same line. There was no first-class boarding call shouted out like an elite passcode. He took his place quietly, right behind a young man holding a guitar and an older couple who seemed a bit nervous about their trip. When he reached the door of the plane, the flight attendant greeted him with the same line she gave the couple before him. "Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you." And she meant it. Raymond found his seat in first class, sat down, buckled in. He looked out the window for a moment, watching the ground crew below. Then he leaned back in his seat and took a deep breath. This time, no one looked at him twice. He was wearing the same simple jacket, the same shoes, the same worn watch, and no one cared. Mid-flight, he walked to the galley to stretch his legs. A flight attendant approached him with a calm smile. "Mr. Bennett, I just wanted to say thank you." Raymond looked at her. "For what?" She hesitated, then continued. "For the changes. I've worked here for 7 years. I've seen a lot. But this, what we're doing now, it feels real." He smiled. "Thank you for being part of it." They spoke for a few minutes longer. She didn't try to flatter him. She wasn't nervous. She was honest. Before he returned to his seat, she added, "By the way, the crew who worked your last flight? The one where you were told to move back?" Raymond nodded. She said, "They all went through retraining. 2 of them stayed. 1 transferred. 1 left on their own." Raymond didn't ask for names. He didn't need to know. When the plane landed, something unexpected happened. The young man with the guitar from the boarding line approached Raymond as they walked off the plane. "Hey," he said, a little nervous. "I just wanted to say, you're the guy from the article, right? The one who owns the airline?" Raymond paused. "Yeah." The man smiled. "Man, that's cool. I thought it was just some made-up viral thing, but you're real." "I'm real," Raymond said, smiling back. "I wanted to say thanks. I'm not a rich guy. I tour in small towns. I sleep on couches sometimes. But this was the first time I didn't feel like I had to apologize for being me on a flight." Raymond nodded. "That means more than you know." The man chuckled. "You know what's crazy? I almost didn't believe the story. Thought it was too good to be true." Raymond grinned. "I didn't believe it either. Not until it actually started changing." They shook hands and parted ways. Back at the Northglide office, Chelsea was waiting with a few updates. "2 new airlines are asking if we'll consult with them," she said. "They're watching what we're doing, quietly, but they're watching." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "We helping competitors now?" She shrugged. "Helping people, not just competitors." He agreed. "Let's do it. If it helps change the industry, why not?" Then she added, "By the way, there's something else. You were mentioned in a letter." "A letter?" She handed him an envelope. It was from a high school in Chicago. Inside was a handwritten note from a teacher. It said, "One of my students used your story in a class presentation. He said it made him want to build something that helps people instead of just trying to get rich." I just wanted to say, thank you. Your story reached farther than you probably expected. Raymond stared at the letter for a long time. Not because of pride, but because for the first time since this journey began, it felt complete. Weeks later, Raymond was invited to speak at a business summit. He declined the spotlight, but they insisted, so he went. Not as a celebrity, not as an executive in a suit. He showed up in the same clothes he wore the day he was judged, and when he walked on stage, the applause was quiet, respectful, but real. He stepped up to the mic, took a deep breath, and said, "I was kicked out of first class for looking poor. But what really bothered me wasn't the seat. It was the mindset. I didn't build an airline to serve the wealthy. I built it to serve people, every kind of person. And if that's not enough to get someone a smile, a welcome, or a little respect, then maybe we need to rethink what business is really about." The room went silent. Then came the loudest applause of the day. Back at home, Raymond sat on his porch one evening as the sun dipped behind the trees. No cameras, no meetings, just him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was running towards something. He just felt still and peaceful. Because sometimes the biggest change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from one quiet decision: to treat people better. Raymond didn't talk much about the summit. People reached out afterward. Emails, phone calls, interviews, most of which he ignored. He didn't need the attention, and he certainly didn't want to be treated like a celebrity. That wasn't what any of this was about. But while the world talked about him, Raymond was more focused on something else. What was happening inside North Glide? Because change isn't something that happens in one meeting. It doesn't stick after one viral story or speech. Real change needs patience. It needs to be protected. He started visiting local airports again, quietly, no press, no announcement, just walks through terminals, waiting in lines, listening. Sometimes he'd book the cheapest ticket available and sit in the very back of the plane just to hear how passengers were being treated. Other times, he spent time talking to baggage handlers, janitors, and even food service workers. He wanted to know if what they were building was actually working, or if it was just good on paper. And what he found surprised him. It was working, but not because of policies or systems alone. It was working because of people. There was an agent in Detroit who made sure every person in a wheelchair got extra attention without being told. There was a gate attendant in Denver who gave kids souvenir wings and explained what pilots do. There was a janitor in Atlanta who helped a nervous traveler find their terminal when no one else would stop to help. None of these people had been instructed to do these things. It wasn't part of a training video. It wasn't about going viral. They were just decent. Raymond realized that the real secret wasn't in building a perfect company. It was in empowering the right people, letting them know they mattered, that they had the freedom to do the right thing without asking for permission. That's when he brought the entire management team into a meeting and said something they hadn't heard before. "We're not just running an airline anymore. We're running a message." They looked at him. He continued, "If we treat this like just another business, it'll fall apart. But if we treat it like a message about dignity, about how people deserve to be seen, then we're doing something that matters." Months passed. North Glide started getting recognized for customer service, not just because of speed or convenience, but because of the atmosphere. The airline's slogan had changed too. No more premium travel for premium people. Now it simply said, "Everyone belongs." It was honest, simple, and powerful. Raymond knew slogans didn't fix everything, but they helped when they were backed by action. One day, Chelsea came into his office holding a box. "What's this?" Raymond asked. She placed it on his desk. "Something that came in from the staff at the Seattle hub. They didn't want to email. They wanted you to open this." He opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes. From staff, from passengers, from volunteers. Some just said, "Thank you." Others told full stories. One note read, "I used to work for a company where I felt invisible. Now I come to work and feel like I actually matter. This isn't just a job anymore. It's a place where I feel proud to wear the uniform." Raymond read every single note. He didn't say much, but his eyes were wet by the end. That weekend, he went for a walk through the city. No destination. Just a long walk. He passed a bookstore window that had a travel magazine displayed in it. The cover caught his eye, his own face in black and white. With the headline, "The Man Who Changed Flying Without Changing Who He Was." He stood there for a moment, not because he was proud of being on the cover, but because the world was finally paying attention to the right part of the story. The article didn't list his net worth. It talked about the day he was asked to move because of how he looked, and how that moment started a ripple effect across an entire industry. Not because he fought back loudly, but because he stayed quiet, paid attention, and built something better. At the end of that same week, something small happened. Raymond was flying home on a North Glide route. A flight attendant walked by him during the safety demonstration, then paused and turned back. "I just want to say, you probably don't remember me. I was on the flight where everything happened. I was in the back that day. I saw the way they treated you. I didn't know who you were then, but I knew it was wrong." Raymond looked at her. She was older now, more confident. "I'm glad you didn't let that be the end of the story," she added. "Some people would have walked away. You didn't." Raymond nodded slowly. "Neither did you." They smiled. When the plane landed, Raymond exited like everyone else. No special escort, no separate lane. Just a man with a carry-on bag and a purpose. Outside, as he waited for a car, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a new airline startup overseas. They wanted to license the North Glide training system and values handbook. Raymond replied with a simple line, "Only if you mean it." He meant every word. This wasn't a trend. It wasn't a marketing trick. It was a culture. He got in the car and leaned back. The driver glanced in the mirror and asked casually, "You that airline guy?" Raymond smiled. "Yeah." The driver nodded. "Good stuff, man. My sister's a flight attendant. She said working there changed her life." Raymond gave a quiet smile and looked out the window. The world was shifting, not fast, but steady. Because respect, once it starts to spread, doesn't stop at airports. It goes everywhere. The ride home was quiet. Raymond stared out the window, passing the city lights that flickered across the glass. His thoughts weren't on the meetings or the interviews or the awards. They were on the moments in between, the small gestures, the people behind the scenes, and the one thing he still hadn't done. The man who had asked him to move seats on that first-class flight. The one who never even looked him in the eye. Raymond had never heard from him again. No apology. No message. Nothing. And truthfully, Raymond hadn't gone looking for it either. But that night, as he sat on his balcony with a cup of coffee in hand, he wondered why that moment still stayed with him so strongly. Not because of the insult, but because of what it revealed. People had a habit of treating others based on surface impressions: outfits, luggage, skin, speech. And even after all the progress, all the changes, those habits hadn't fully disappeared. Raymond didn't want revenge. That was never the point. But he did want understanding. He wanted more people to see what dignity really looked like. A week later, Raymond asked Chelsea to pull a report. "I want a list of every complaint or conflict filed in the last year, where staff or passengers were treated unfairly based on appearance." Chelsea looked confused but nodded. It took her 2 days. When she came back, she had a binder full of reports. "This is just a portion," she said. "You sure you want to read all this?" Raymond nodded. Every word. And he did. It took nearly a week. But he read through every complaint, every statement from gate agents, flight crews, passengers, janitors, even TSA reports. There was a pattern. In almost every case, the problem wasn't about protocol. It was about perception. People judged too fast, spoke too sharp, looked down too quickly, and it wasn't always staff. Sometimes it was the passengers. Other times, it was supervisors. There wasn't a single group to blame. The issue wasn't individuals. It was culture. Raymond closed the binder and wrote a single sentence on the front cover: "Perception without patience is a poor compass." He called a meeting the next morning. The room was full. Department heads, regional managers, training leads, even the legal team. Raymond stood at the front, binder in hand. He didn't give a speech. He just read 5 real stories from the pages. No names, no locations, just facts. And when he finished, the room was silent. "Every one of these people," he said, "deserved better." A hand raised from the back. It was a training director from the Southeast Division. "What do you want us to do?" Raymond replied without hesitating. "Build new habits." He continued, "We've done the work on systems, but this is deeper. We need to train eyes, ears, tone. We need to reward patience, not just efficiency." They spent the next 3 hours mapping out what that meant. By the end of the week, every North Glide employee, from call center reps to pilots, was enrolled in a new program called the 3-second rule. It was simple. Before responding to anyone, whether customer or coworker, take 3 seconds to pause. 3 seconds to reset your tone. 3 seconds to drop assumptions. 3 seconds to listen. Most companies wouldn't bother. Raymond did, because he knew the difference it could make. 3 months later, the results started showing. Complaints about staff attitude dropped. Passenger satisfaction scores went up. And most surprisingly, staff morale improved. When you treat others better, you feel better. That ripple was real. But Raymond still carried the weight of that old flight. That moment he was told he didn't belong. Not out of bitterness, but because that moment had built a question in him he had never answered. Was that man, the one who told him to move, still walking through life treating others that way? Or had he changed too? Raymond had no idea until a letter showed up. It was in a plain envelope, no return address, just a typed note. It read, "You won't remember me. I'm sure of it. But I remember you. I was wrong. Not just that day. For a long time before it. You didn't fight back. You didn't yell. But you did something I never saw coming. You built something that proved me wrong without saying a word. I saw your story. I saw what you've done, and it made me look in the mirror. I quit my job. I started over. I'm learning how to treat people better, not because of who they are, but because of who I wasn't. Thank you for not being like me that day. There was no name. Raymond read it twice. Then he placed it inside the same binder of reports and wrote one more line. Change is slow, but it travels. He closed the binder and placed it on his shelf, not to forget, but to remember how far things had come. The next morning, as Raymond boarded a flight to a regional event, a young boy and coach dropped his bag, and all his coloring pencils spilled out. No one moved. Until a man in a suit, sitting near the front, bent down and helped him pick them up. The man wasn't a Northglide employee, just another passenger. But something had shifted. Raymond noticed the logo on the man's bag, a different airline. He smiled. Maybe the message was spreading after all. Raymond spent the rest of that flight quietly watching the people around him. Nothing unusual happened. No grand moments, no loud arguments or big announcements. Just people helping each other. A woman giving up her window seat to a young mother with a restless baby. A flight attendant patiently explaining gate changes to an older couple who looked confused. A teenager offering to lift someone's bag into the overhead compartment. Small things, but meaningful. Moments like these didn't make headlines, but they made a difference. Raymond understood now that his journey wasn't just about what had happened to him. It was about using that moment to help others. To show that someone's appearance didn't define their worth. To prove that respect wasn't earned by a price tag or a business card. It was something everyone deserved. By the time the plane landed, Raymond had decided what came next. He was going to visit every Northglide hub over the next year, not as a CEO, not for media, not to give speeches or do interviews, just to listen, to hear from the staff, to meet the passengers, to learn what was working and what wasn't. The company was doing well. Profits were steady, reviews were strong. But Raymond didn't want well. He wanted better. His first stop was a small airport in Montana. Quiet, clean, and not very busy. The kind of place most executives never visited unless there was a problem. Raymond walked in without security or an assistant. He wore a worn jacket and carried a backpack. Nobody recognized him, and that was exactly what he wanted. He watched a gate agent named Denise handle a frustrated traveler whose flight had been canceled due to weather. Denise kept her voice calm. She offered options. She didn't rush. And when the man finally calmed down, she handed him a water bottle and said, "Sorry your day started rough. We're going to fix this." Raymond stepped forward after the man walked away. "That was impressive," he said. She smiled. "Just doing my job." "No," Raymond replied. "That was more than your job." He reached into his backpack and handed her a small envelope. "This is for you. No cameras, no press. Just thanks." Inside was a handwritten note and a bonus voucher signed with his name. Her eyes widened when she realized who he was. "But you didn't have to," he cut her off. "You didn't have to go the extra mile either, but you did. That matters." Over the next 4 months, Raymond visited 17 airports. Sometimes he was noticed, sometimes he wasn't. But in each place, he found something new to admire. A baggage handler in Atlanta who personally called a family when their lost luggage was found. A janitor in Seattle who helped a kid find his teddy bear. A flight attendant in Houston who learned sign language just to make one deaf passenger feel seen. Raymond documented all of it in a journal. Not for PR, just for himself. He called it The Quiet Ones. And in the back of the journal, he left space for a final chapter titled, "The Moment It All Changed." He hadn't filled that part in yet, because he wasn't sure what that moment was. Was it the day he got kicked out of first class? Was it the letter he received months later? Or was it still coming? He wasn't sure. It was in Chicago that something unexpected happened. While waiting for a connecting flight, Raymond stood in line at a coffee shop near Gate 22. In front of him stood a man who looked vaguely familiar, well-dressed, sharp, polished. And then he spoke. And Raymond knew exactly who he was. It was the same man from that flight. The one who told him he didn't belong in first class. He was ordering a latte. Raymond didn't say a word. He just waited. When the man turned around, their eyes met. There was a pause, then recognition. A long silence followed. Raymond didn't break it. Finally, the man spoke. "You're the airline guy." Raymond nodded. The man's face shifted. Not to shame, not to embarrassment, but something deeper. Regret. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "That day, I didn't know who you were." Raymond's expression stayed calm. "That's the thing," he said. "You still don't." The man looked confused. "You judged a stranger based on clothes. You didn't ask questions. You didn't pause. You just assumed." The man nodded slowly. "I've thought about that day a lot." "I hope you did," Raymond said, "because people like you shape how others feel. And that moment, that wasn't about me. That was about everyone you'd ever dismissed without knowing them." They stood in silence again. Raymond didn't need an apology. He wasn't looking for one. He just wanted the man to sit with it. And he did. After a while, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. "I started something new," he said. "It's small, but it's honest work. I teach new hires at my company how to slow down, how to listen better, how to check their judgments at the door." He paused. "I tell them about that day. Not with your name, just mine, as a warning." Raymond took the card, glanced at it, then placed it in his jacket pocket. "Good," he said. "Keep doing that." And then he walked away. No handshake, no photo, no forgiveness speech, just a quiet end to an old chapter. That night, Raymond sat in his hotel room, pulled out his journal, and flipped to the last page. The moment it all changed, he picked up a pen and started writing. It wasn't a headline moment. It didn't involve applause or cameras. It was two men standing in silence, facing their past. One had changed, the other had healed. And in that stillness, something unspoken happened. Not closure, but clarity. He closed the journal and set it on the nightstand. There were still more places to visit, more people to meet. But something inside felt lighter now. Not because of what had been said, but because of what had finally been understood. Months passed since Raymond's quiet encounter with the man at the coffee shop. By then, his journey was beginning to feel like something more than just personal growth. It was becoming a mission, one that extended beyond the walls of his company, beyond the staff and passengers, and into something deeper, a cultural shift. Raymond was no longer just a CEO of an airline. He was a symbol of change. His story had sparked interest, not because he had once been kicked out of first class, but because he had turned that moment into something meaningful. Something that people could apply to their everyday lives, and the ripple effect had begun. It was early one Thursday morning when Raymond got a call from his team. They had good news and bad news. The good news is that we've hit our highest customer satisfaction ratings ever. The 3-second rule program is working, Chelsea said, her voice bright through the line. The bad news is, there's a viral post about us. Raymond's interest piqued. A post? He asked, leaning forward in his chair. What kind of post? Chelsea hesitated. It's about you. Specifically, it's about how you used to be kicked out of first class for looking poor, and how you've turned that around. It's very personal. Raymond was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Let it go viral. Are you sure? Yes, he replied. Let's see where it goes. That night, Raymond found himself reading the post that was being shared by hundreds of people across social media platforms. It was written by a random passenger who had been on the flight with Raymond all those months ago. She had shared the full story, the one where the CEO of Northglide Airlines was kicked out of first class for looking out of place. But instead of focusing on the negativity of that moment, the passenger had written about Raymond's actions afterward, how he had turned that personal pain into something larger, something that impacted people on a deeper level. She told her followers about how Raymond had chosen to make the airline a place where dignity was at the core, where judgment was replaced with kindness. The post had thousands of likes, comments, and shares. Many people voiced their admiration for Raymond and the airline for making a difference. Others expressed surprise, wondering how such a thing could happen in the first place, why a simple mistake could make someone feel so small. Raymond smiled to himself. It was exactly the kind of attention he'd been hoping for, positive, constructive, and full of hope for the future. The following weeks brought even more change. The 3-second rule continued to transform Northglide's company culture. But the effects were starting to spread outside the company as well. Other airlines and companies reached out to Raymond, curious about the program. Some wanted to adopt it themselves. Others simply wanted to hear his story. Raymond found himself giving talks to a variety of organizations, everything from local businesses to larger corporations, who wanted to bring more empathy into their work environments. He wasn't doing this for profit. He wasn't doing this for fame. He was doing it because he had seen firsthand how small changes could make a big difference. One afternoon, as Raymond walked through the airport to board his flight, he overheard a conversation between two young women sitting at a nearby cafe. I heard Northglide Airlines is doing this amazing thing now, one of them said. Like they actually teach their staff to slow down and listen to customers before reacting. No more assumptions. The other woman smiled. Yeah, my mom works in customer service and she says it's like a revolution. Raymond paused for a moment, taking in their words. They didn't know who he was. They didn't recognize him. But he didn't mind. He was content in knowing that the work was speaking for itself. It wasn't about him. It was about the people who'd embraced this change. And it was working. 2 weeks later, Raymond was in a board meeting with his senior team. He could see the change even in them. They weren't just talking about profits or quarterly reports. They were discussing the impact they were making. We've seen a shift in how passengers feel about us, one of the senior managers, Kelly, said. They're not just rating us based on how well we serve them. They're rating us on how we make them feel when they step on the plane. We've seen more positive social media interactions and feedback from our customers than we've had in years. Raymond nodded. And we'll continue to build on that. But we need to go further. He paused, looking at the team around him. What if we could take what we've learned here and apply it outside the walls of this company? What if we could build partnerships with other businesses, schools, and organizations to help them develop the same culture of empathy and respect that we've created here? A murmur of agreement passed through the room. I think it's time, Raymond continued. I want to create a foundation, a place where we can teach people how to build the same kind of change we're building here. Let's make empathy the new standard. 2 months later, the North Glide Empathy Foundation was born. It was a nonprofit that aimed to help companies, organizations, and communities develop a culture of understanding, empathy, and respect. They would offer workshops, seminars, and training sessions to people in all walks of life, from teachers to healthcare workers to managers. Raymond's mission had expanded far beyond what he had ever imagined. The Foundation's first major project was a partnership with several universities to help students understand the importance of empathy in leadership and business. Raymond worked with professors, speakers, and mentors who helped guide students on how to lead with kindness and consideration, rather than just profit and power. The foundation was a success, and Raymond had finally found his answer. This wasn't just about that moment on the plane. It was about creating a ripple effect that could go on long after he was gone. A world where people saw each other not for what they wore or how they looked, but for the hearts they carried. Months turned into years. Raymond continued to lead North Glide with the same values that had made the company great. He kept working with the foundation, pushing for social change, working tirelessly to ensure that empathy became the standard, not the exception. And then, one day, as he sat in his office looking out the window, he remembered something that had once weighed so heavily on his mind. The flight, the insult, the man who had told him he didn't belong. That memory no longer stung. It had evolved into something much more powerful, a reminder of why he had started this journey, and why he would keep going. Raymond didn't need to prove anything anymore. The work was doing that for him. Years later, North Glide Airlines had become more than just a transportation company. It had become a global example of what happens when empathy and humility are placed at the heart of leadership. Raymond, now a respected figure around the world, never let the success change his roots. He still dressed simply. He still walked through his offices like everyone else. He still flew commercial when he could have flown private. But something had shifted, not in how he looked, but in how the world saw him. People no longer judged him by the clothes on his back. They recognized the character he carried. The man who was once humiliated for looking too poor to sit in first class had gone on to change the way people think about service, business, and dignity. One evening, during a small event hosted by the North Glide Empathy Foundation, a young employee approached Raymond. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, eyes sincere. "I joined this company right out of school. I was nervous, unsure of myself, but the culture you created made me feel like I mattered. You don't know what that means to people like me." Raymond smiled warmly. "Actually," he replied, "I do." As the night wind blew gently outside the glass windows of the event hall, Raymond looked out at the city lights below. He had come a long way from that one flight. And in the end, he hadn't just changed a policy or an airline or even a company culture. He had reminded people everywhere of one simple truth. It costs nothing to show someone respect, but it can mean everything. And that made all the difference.